Well, how did you find him to work with?
I never worked with him. I wouldn't know
How did you find him to work for? I mean, was he particularly critical?
Korzybski, age near 70, and I, in my teens and early 20s, how the hell could we have worked together? We didn't work together at all. He did his thing. I tried to do his thing, you know. I mean, he said to me, I worked in his library when I had a year of residency as a Korzybski Fellow, the second of two, so far as I know. Maybe maybe I will endow some more in the future. Robert Strauss, who unfortunately just recently died, endowed a Korzybski Fellowship for Guthrie Jansen, which produced selections. I used selections for years when I taught Science and Sanity. I don't know that people use it as much as they should. But anyway, I had the honor of having a Korzybski Fellowship for a year, and I stayed there at the Institute almost exactly a year before he died. I emptied waste baskets. I put kerosene in a kerosene burning stove Kindig had there. Kindig ran the place, you understand. From time to time, I would drift by on my errands, and because I worked on the third floor of this house in Lime Rock, in the library, and Korzybski said, Dave, you have to function as a watchdog. People will try to steal my books. And so I tried to prevent people from stealing his books. Of course, I did read his pulp fiction, detective stories that he read to relax, and I did drink some of his rum, which he used to relax. But nobody stole any of his books while I lived there. But from time to time, he would call me in and say, Dave, come in. Sit down. And he would talk to me about whatever had importance to him at the time. And he'd say, you're not taking notes. Here, there's paper and pencils there on the desk. Take notes. And so, you know, so I took notes. And he would tell me what he wanted to tell me. So, all right, that's all, and I'd leave. I benefited from living in his presence, but not from any kind of a buddy-buddy or whatever relationship. He had friends like Dr. Kelly, who unfortunately committed suicide, and Saint-Bois, and Bontrager, and Lee, and of course the great Wendell Johnson. But I consisted of a student, and I went there to study, and to learn, not to chum up with him. I didn't expect it, and he sure as hell never delivered it.
Well, what kind of, but was he pretty good about giving feedback to you or making you feel as though...
Say, stop acting like a young shit. Yes, he'd give you feedback. He'd say, I saw you the other day. You did a backflip on the lawn. You can kill yourself. You know what they call that in Italy? They call it the salto mortale, leap of death. And he'd say, hey, every time I see you, you got a cigarette in your mouth. Don't you realize what you're doing to yourself? Stop that. He smoked at the time, slightly vitiating the message, you see?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I got some feedback from him, all right.
So how did he react, how did he relate with the students in his class? I mean, did he kind of have a different persona when he was on during class as opposed to when you saw him when he was not in class?
It depended a lot about when. You see, I understand that in the early years, you know, the Institute started in '38, but Korzybski began giving seminars some years before then. But anyway, I only came in contact with them almost 10 years later than that. And they tell me that in the earlier years, that he would walk up and down between the rows of the chairs, beating on the floor with his cane if necessary, and haranguing the students, getting their thalamic reactions all stirred up and things like that. However, by the time I came along in '47, you see, he had aged. Not as old as I right now, of course, but he had aged. And so he stayed at his damn desk. And he would insist on audience reaction, particularly of two kinds. He would ask rhetorical questions and say, "Do you think that seems correct?" And he'd say, "Well, lower your nose if you do," meaning you should nod, you see, and so people learn that right away. And then also he insisted on people responding when he would say something about his views about some aspect of mathematical logic or philosophy or whatever the hell. And he'd say, "But that just consists of my personal opinion. Any good?" And he trained the class to say, "No!" Because that consisted of his personal individual opinion, not the opinion, the racial opinion. Doesn't have anything to do with race today. The opinion of, let's say, humanity, which equals science.
What was your... now I'm just down to reading questions on my list here. Well, was there anything about him that you found particularly frustrating as a student?
Well, not in the terms of the question that you asked. I, of course, felt frustrated that I didn't have 3 degrees and have an opportunity to have worked with him and met him and so on some years before. But apart from that, no.
I mean, did you feel overwhelmed by the material?
No, I studied the material before I first went there. That puzzled me so much. You know, I don't think one can emphasize enough that we have to grab the kids at junior high, high school level, and somehow or other make it possible or encourage them or whatever, motivate them to get with it then, because by the time they reach college, it may have become too late. I felt that seemed like such a great advantage I had over so many of the other students. By the time I went to a seminar with Korzybski, I had 19 years by then, I guess. I had read Science and Sanity a couple of times. I didn't understand every goddamn word. I didn't know all of the, I didn't understand all the mathematics of the curl and the other quantum mechanic stuff in the book 3, but I'd gone over the whole material, and it, believe me, it had affected the old semantic reactions. But it amazed me the first time I went to a seminar. I didn't amaze all that much the second, third, and nth time, but the other people seemed to have read maybe Hayakawa or maybe Irving Lee's book, and they came to a seminar with Korzybski. They said, "Oh, you know, this seemed like real tough stuff." For Christ's sake. You can't go to a graduate seminar after first year freshman course in anything. This, in fact, this increasingly annoyed me as years went on. When I'd see them, people well-meaning, hard-working, people running international conferences. International conferences, my God, on general semantics, and they had to run introductory courses so people would know what they meant, general semantics. Well, unfortunate. Wrong. Next question.
What was there a point at which maybe epiphany is the wrong word, but do you remember the point at which you really made you came to the conclusion that this really was something that was more or less going to be with you for the rest of your life? I mean, was it just kind of a curiosity for a while, and then? If
so, it happened while I read A.E. Van Vogt, not when I read Korzybski, because when I read Korzybski, I knew that, that seemed like the most useful, productive, creative, encouraging material that I had ever heard of.
And had you read Manhood of Humanity also before you went to seminar?
I had this great advantage. So many people run into, I hate to say it, Hayakawa, all right. And then eventually they may read a little bit of, not too much, but a little bit of Korzybski. When I had learned that there really did exist such material as General Semantics, written by Korzybski, there at Culver Military Academy, I went to the library to see what the hell. And I looked up at the card catalog. We had cards back then. And I said, Manhood of Humanity. I thought, never heard of that one before, but then why should I? I haven't heard of anything before. So I checked the book out, and I read Manhood. I thought, sounds really great. What else? You know, at this point, I awaited material from the Institute. Only subsequently did I encounter the contributions of Hayakawa, which I read with great interest, of course. Sure beats nothing. And the books of Lee and Johnson. But my introduction consisted of, and I feel so fortunate that it worked out like this, Manhood, and then Science and Sanity.
Did Korzybski talk much about his the years in between the time he wrote Manhood of Humanity and Science and Sanity? I mean, about the apparent struggle that he went through in writing and formulating.
Well, in a sense he did, because you see, you know, Manhood got published in 21, and then by 23 he'd already written the first time-binding paper, General Theory. And between then, he spoke about standing on the Woolworth building, the tallest building in New York at that time, I believe, and looking down, he saw the humans down there crowling around and all of that. But I don't know. Maybe that took place before Manhood. But yes, he spoke extensively about what happened after Well, you know what happened after Manhood. He created an intellectual stir. I mean, they didn't have the media quite that well organized back then, but they did the best they could. And so, not only the media, but I believe William Allenson White wrote a review of Manhood of Humanity in a psychiatric journal. And he said, this fellow Korzybski might have something to offer if he learned something about psychiatry. And Korzybski read this and thought, no. And then he kept thinking about it. He thought, no, for God's sake, maybe the guy's right. So he went to this fellow, William Allenson White, and said, how do you think I ought to learn something about psychiatry? And so this led to his studying for at least a year at St. Elizabeth Hospital in in Washington, D.C. And so, you know, and he told us about all of this and getting to sit in on the autopsies and on the reviews of the patients' cases, and where he would see a guy and say, who called himself Napoleon, he'd say, "Good morning, Napoleon," and then came the day when he'd say, "Good morning, Napoleon." He said, "Oh, wait, my name is not Napoleon." And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "No, my name is Julius Caesar." And AK said, "Well, he told us in his seminar, see." And AK said, "Well, I thought your name was Napoleon." And Julius Caesar said, "No, that was my name by my other mother." So anyway, he you know, laughter. So